Hey everybody, before we start the show, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press. March is Midgard month in Kobold Press, and today's guest on the show is Wolfgang Baur. We are going to be talking all about some amazing resources you can check out for the Midgard campaign setting. There is a Worldbook and a player's book for Midgard, and they are really super awesome. The setting has been updated. It is a dark fantasy setting for 5th edition D&D, also available for Pathfinder. You can check it out at koboldpress.com on the Kobold Press store, or really wherever fine RPG products are sold. These are incredible books. If you have the 3.5 Pathfinder version, you know how rich the world of Midgard is, and now it's even bigger, it's even better, it's in 2 books, and they've updated things. The setting has jumped forward in the timeline 10 years. Check it out over at koboldpress.com. It is Midgard month. Woo! This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, we have a real treat. I am talking with Wolfgang Baur, who has been in the gaming industry for years, and his company, Kobold Press, just turned 12. Before that, he was working for TSR and many other amazing game companies. You might know Kobold Press because Wolfgang has been on the show before. He is a consummate sponsor of the Tabletop Babble and other Don't Split the Podcast Network podcasts, and is just an amazing person and a brilliant, brilliant designer. We are going to be talking about his update to the Midgard campaign setting, which is Kobold Press's campaign setting, which is incredible. It is one of my favorite settings. So let's jump right into that conversation with Wolfgang. Okay, everybody, I am here with one of my very favorite people, Wolfgang Baur. Wolfgang, welcome to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh, sure. I'll tell people. I'm a longtime game designer, editor, and for the last 12 years, publisher for third-party D&D and for Wizards of the Coast and TSR. People have been reminding me lately that I used to edit Dungeon and Dragon magazines. And now, of course, I'm the publisher at Kobold Press.
That is awesome. Yeah, you have a storied career in this industry. And Kobold Press just turned 12, right?
12, like yesterday. Yes, 12 years. I'm ready to go to middle school. I'm good. We're not the scrappy little kid anymore. We're going to be the surly teenager here for a few years, and look out.
Wow. Congratulations. What a beautiful young kobold you're growing up to be.
We have a glossy snout.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Fine and healthy. And you've lived this long. 12 years, I imagine, for a kobold is about as long as any of them live before adventurers might.
We're into the elder category. We are revered and venerable. We get bonuses to wisdom at this point. You know, we're pretty happy. Yeah, 12.
Yeah,
big.
Wow. That is incredible. So it is awesome to have you back. And we are talking about Midgard.
Yes.
Yes, so Midgard is your campaign setting. We actually, way back like a year ago, talked about it when you had your Kickstarter running, and we just barely scratched the surface. So I am looking forward to really doing a deep dive into Midgard with you. For people who may have missed that podcast or don't know, what is Midgard?
So Midgard is a dark fantasy world of deep magic, and it's sort of a Eurocentric setting because it leans heavily on those parts of European myth and lore that don't show up in your French and English tradition, right? There's a lot of Germanic influence, a lot of deep dark forest, a lot of Slavic sort of dark, or the Tsar and demons of the East kind of stuff. And of course, despite the name Midgard, it has both sort of a Norse culture, but it runs all the way into Arabic and African and Egyptian influences in the Southlands portion. Basically, it's a darker and more I'd call it a skewed, twisted, and blended version of European myths and legends. And it's been going, this is its second edition, right? We are literally in the second round of Midgard with this project. So we learned from the first edition, and we've got a bigger and better map and more to discuss. And there have been 50 adventures published for it. So it's pretty rich for a third-party campaign setting in terms of the support it has. And of course, it's Kobold friendly. There's a dragon empire that I'm very fond of. I mean, that dragon empire is where kobolds are citizens and all the hairy races are sort of second class, right? All those furry people are not quite as, well, respectable as the dragonborn and the dragons and the kobolds are.
Yeah, that is very true. I definitely think of Midgard as a very rich world for people to play in, and it's also got its specific themes. I was talking about it yesterday with some friends, and it's certainly it's not your Forgotten Realms, as it were.
No, it tries to pick and choose a couple of main foundation stones and build around those, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ideas like ley line magic are pretty central to the setting. And in fact, the new setting map has the major ley lines, not all of them, but the major ones are on the map, right? Named and shown. So that sort of thing is central to what Midgard does. And likewise, we pick sort of regions, like the Wasted West, where the dark gods walk, is a theme. Likewise, so is the Seven Cities, right? Where very civilized people all follow the god of war and kill each other on a regular basis. The Seven Cities never gets enough credit. Everyone's like, but they're so mercantile and rich and wise and full of learning. And I'm like, they're all followers of the war god. They'll kill you. But they dress so well. No, you're missing the point here. So they all have themes. They all have sort of a flavor, and there's 7 or 8 major regions, depending on what you count. And so it's really 7 or 8 campaigns in one. That's our sort of secret. We make it easy to pick a flavor. And if you decide that you're done with the Norse and the ice and the snow and the giants and the dwarves and the ring magic and the rune magic, then you say, we'll cross the Nieder Strait. We'll go to the land of the elves. I'm sure it'll be all peaceful there. Yeah, it's easy to sort of pack up and move themes between those regions because they're just, I don't know, like human empires or cultures now. They all have a direction. They all have particular kinds of dungeons or adventures associated with them. And the Midgard Worldbook, this big, massive volume we just published, basically is like 400 pages of adventure hooks, right? we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what does this mean for the players? And how do we design for the players? And how does the game master get the players to do something here? I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into writing the overview chapter the first time. And I sort of had the same attitude this time, which is, the creation myths are fun to write, but every page we spend on when the earth cooled is a page we don't spend on what are the adventurers doing today? So we tell the creation myth like 3 different ways, right? Like, here's what the giants say, here's what the dragons say, here's what the elves say. None of them really agree. But that's enough to get like backstory going. And then we get immediately into cosmology, planets, holidays, festivals, festivals to the war god. Things where conflict might ensue.
Wow. That's huge. I remember reading the first one that came out.
Oh, yeah, 6 years ago.
Yeah, and I didn't even play Pathfinder at the time, and it did not matter. You get so much out of this book, no matter what you're playing. You can really, there's so much rich story information. You can really pull out a ton.
Right.
So there's 2 books, right, that you have just not re-released, but you've updated the world and you've released 2 books.
Yeah, the update to the world is really to make it 5th edition compatible and supporting, right? Because that was the main request we got. People said, I'm not playing Pathfinder anymore, or I'm just started playing and I'm playing 5e. Where's my 5e support? And we said, here it is. And the second book we released is called The Hero's Handbook, which is pretty much the player's handbook for Midgard, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's a 5e source book for the players. The game master can look at it and say, "Oh yeah, this is all great," but you can also just hand it to your player group, and they'll say, "Oh look, here's how I play the bear folk. Here's how I play a kobold. Here's the variants for dwarves. Here's um, 50 new subclasses for every class except the monk." Right?
Wow.
Yeah. Here's 300 new spells, right, which are specific to the
Oh my
setting,
gosh.
and 20 new divine domains. So,
Oh.
I mean, it really is a new player's handbook. It's that much meaty stuff, backgrounds, right, that are very world specific and sort of richly tailored to stories you might tell or characters you might be. And that's everything from, oh, I don't know, Sobecker scouts who are sort of urban ranger types to a priestess of the red goddess who is she's sort of I love talking about her. My players hate her to pieces. She's such a charming deity. She's the goddess of blood and lust and winter and death. And she's the patron goddess of the undead kingdom called Morgau, ruled now by King Lucan, who has been there for a few hundred years because he's a vampire. And it's sort of the Ravenloft of Midgard, except that unlike Ravenloft, it's not neatly contained. It has taken over some of the neighbors. It's bleeding the peasants dry and, saying, what else you got?
Mm-hmm.
And the red goddess is the patron goddess of that realm, who she's also the goddess of mothers and childbirth, right? She has sort of a warmer side, mostly in the sense of, we're going to need more peasants to drain dry later.
Oh.
Let me help you, dearie. Come this way.
Oh
right?
my God. It's terrifying.
Just the most horrific figure. But what I love in the new book is she gets a little more lore, and you can play a priest or priestess with that background. And of course, the background could be, well, I was raised in this faith and I have left, right? I've left the realm of Morgau. I'm no longer with those undead. I don't have to worry about being drained at night. I've escaped. I'm free. I'm trying to outrun my past. Or you could play a little differently. You could say, I've left Morgau, and though my companions may not know it, I bring the word of the red goddess to other lands.
Oh.
I'll share what I know, right? There's just wonderful possibilities. And yet none of my players have ever said, no, that's really a background I want. I need a surly goth teenager to say, yeah, I'm playing that. Have you seen the holy symbol of her, the new holy symbol art?
It's so good.
Yeah. The little doll. Okay. I'm not going to give it all away, but it's beautiful.
So what's interesting about her, you made the Ravenloft comparison, and Mike Shea ran a game of Curse of Strahd, and he was borrowing a lot from that to, that mythology to bring into his Curse of Strahd game, and ran
awesome.
Bill Slavisek's adventure that
the
Kobold
Blood
put
Vaults.
Out.
Yay,
Yes,
Blood Vaults of
yeah.
Sister Alcava. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it was great. And it was sort of like you said, it had this idea of Ravenloft, through the power of this goddess, was expanding right into other realms. And so the idea that in Midgard there's a place like Ravenloft, but instead of the Lord of Ravenloft being depressed and trapped, the Lord of Ravenloft is trying to conquer the world. Is so scary. Is so much more scary than being trapped.
He's got nasty neighbors, right, who don't want him to expand. It's not easy being an undead lord when there's competition. I mentioned that Dragon Empire, and there's a bunch of ancient elves with high magic, and people aren't just putting up with it. But yeah, it's kind of hard to fight the ghoulish shock troops and the vampire generals and their horde of wailing, woeful human peasants who are conscripts and really don't want to be there. But so that's just one of the kingdoms, right? And that's certainly one of the highest profile, and a lot of people want to play there. It's super hero hostile, right? Walking around a land of the undead, but it's escapable. So unlike Ravenloft, if you can just get back over the borders, you'll be fine. Yeah, I think there's just so much potential in the way some of the setting book is written and in the way the backgrounds play off it, right? Each of the backgrounds is just a huge campaign arc or story seed or character arc, and it doesn't cover everything. Like there's a Griffin Knight for people from Zobek and the Margrave. If you want to be a fighter who aspires to train and ride a Griffin, here you go, right? And that's a whole story too. It's just sort of a matter of what do your players want, doing a good session zero, making sure you're all on the same page. And my advice usually is to say, pick characters from one or two regions of Midgard instead of like one from column A, B, C, and D. It's possible to have too much variety, right? You have someone from the Dragon Empire and someone from the Wastes and someone from the Northlands and some follower of the God of War. Yeah, okay. They're a motley crew. It could work, but it's a little easier on the game master if they're all pulling at least kind of together.
Yes. And so speaking of making things easy on the game master, like you said, you've got two books and you've got one book that's a player book, so you can just hand it over to the players, right? And they can read every page and it's fine, which implies to me that the world book is full of secrets.
It totally is. And we had such a hard time with this in the old one, right? In the old one, we had to mush the two things together. In the new edition, having them separated like this is a huge boon to page count and like how much mechanics we can put in one book. But it also means that all the secret stuff is in the Midgard Worldbook. All the detailed maps, all the characters, all of their plots, what the rulers are up to, weird little bits of culture, right? That the players might discover while exploring, but that you could decide, I'm not going to share that information right away and have it be part of the process of exploration without worrying that, oh, right next door is this character background or this feat they care about. There's a ton more information on ley lines and shadow roads. Players love them because ley lines pump up their magic and shadow roads take them from place to place pretty easily by passing through this dark shadow realm. It's not quite as nice as teleport, but it's sure a lot easier than walking those 800 miles. Those sorts of quirks of the setting or features of the setting are given a lot of detail. So are all the rulers, and each and every area, each and every like nation or region or free city has a section called Adventures in Blank. So if you're in Zobek and you're like, what should happen in Zobek? Well, here's 3, 4, 6, 10 adventure hooks. Now, they're not fully written out adventures, but there's certainly enough for an inventive game master to say, oh, yeah, I can do something with that. And in combination with a monster manual and, a couple of NPC characters, off you go. We've done that since the first edition because honestly, just describing how cool some place is great. But describing how cool it is and then saying, and here's how the players wind up in the soup is making the GM's job easier. And that's what we want, right? Because it's meant to be not just sort of wonderful lore, start to finish, rich in ideas. It's meant to be, here, Game Master, raiding parties from the Dragon Empire harass this kingdom all the time. So here's how that happens. Or here's this ambitious, greedy lord who has plans. What are they, right? There's also magic items. There's also a section of spells that really players shouldn't know about. Yes. It was so much fun doing the 5th edition appendix. And there's a Pathfinder appendix too, full of stuff you're not supposed to know. Like the spells section has the spells for anti-paladins. It has the blood magic. It has the dooms. It has void magic. It has, the blood magic alone is like, the players can frantically flip through the player's book, the hero's handbook for Midgard. Like, where is this coming from? And they won't find it. There's also there's something called the lust domain, which let's go back to our blood goddess, Melina. Her priests and priestesses are pure evil, but they're also capable of being super charming, sexy beasts who just happen to drain you dry later with a kiss like a succubus, right?
Wow.
So it's possible to just pull out spells and abilities that characters don't know. I want to say there's maybe 50 of them, maybe less. It's not as big as the 300 in the Hero's Handbook, but there's a section on like void exposure, what happens when the void starts to warp your body. Because the void is a thing in Midgard that corrupts the flesh, and the shadow is a thing that corrupts the mind and brings you to despondence and despair. So we have new madnesses. We have all of that sort of like, oh, things go horribly wrong. Yeah, we have that here. New necromancy, some frost spells for Boreas, and then a couple of things like Knoll archetypes, which are in the GM book not because we expect you to create like Knoll NPCs with full stats, but just sort of as inspiration because, well, frankly, Knolls are a blast to play, and they show up a bunch in two of the big adventures that are out for both 5th edition D&D and Pathfinder, namely Cat and Mouse and Grimalkin. So they're both set in the Southlands, and Knolls feature prominently in those. So we say, well, why don't we put some Knoll support in here, some Southlands support. It's all sorts of things that you as a game... Oh, there's some drugs and magical poisons.
Oh. And masks, right?
Yeah. Well, the masks are related to the gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're not magical items as such, but the concept of masks in Midgard is one that I don't think I explained all that well the first time around. So we spent a fair bit of time working in the Pantheon chapter, talking about the masks and what they are. And basically the idea is godhood in Midgard is a little less clear-cut, right? Like gods don't always show themselves in their full form, and they aren't always truthful with their followers. They may take on new shapes and try to build new followers. And when they do that, we call it taking masks, right? So some gods like Thor and Mavros, the southern god of war, seem to be fairly similar in some ways, right? Like they have control over storm and they're war gods, and the tempest answers their call. And so a lot of people say, well, are those two the same god under a different name? And the gods never answer that question. They say, maybe. Here's what Mavros wants from you, right? Go make a pilgrimage to the Western Waste and smite the goblins. Oh, okay. Here's what Thor wants. Drink a lot. Go smite these giants. Oh, all right. Behind the scenes, yeah, some of these gods are exactly the same under different names for different communities. And so the priests and followers, to some degree, say, well, mine is the true God, and your God is just a mask of my true God. I know what he really wants. And you've got sort of a corrupted version of the faith over there. Well, that's great from a design perspective, because suddenly you can have disagreements within a faith, right? You can have splitters.
Oh, yeah. You know,
which, yeah, is like a whole category of adventures and role-playing and narrative that is impossible if, like, Thor is more like, I don't know, the New England Patriots, rah, rah, Thor, right? Everyone knows what they're about. Everyone knows who the quarterback is. We know how it works. Great. So it's less certain. And at least to my eye, having a priest whose faith has areas of disagreement, areas of confusion and obscurity, places where the sacred texts are not completely clear or others contradict it with a different text that seems kind of similar. There's a lot of potential there, and we have a lot of fun with it. And once in a while, of course, the masks slip and it becomes clear that God A is also God B and, has been working against everyone this whole time.
Sure. And I think it feels more like real life, right? When you think about all of the branches of a religion like Christianity, right? It's all the same Jesus. It's all the same Son of God and everything like that. But there's so many disagreements about ways to interpret the word of those people.
What is more important, right? Is it acts or is it faith? Is it these sorts of festivals on this calendar. And so injecting uncertainty was a big part of the masks thing, and it's worked, right? Once game masters get it, they're like, oh, this is great. I could have a good time with this. We very much aim for a more realistic feeling religion where people have deep and devout characters, but people still disagree. Plus, the other thing I gotta say about the Pantheon chapter this time is we did a better job on the Southern gods, because we've done the Southlands book in between, and all the old elven gods who are mostly gone or failing or just not around as much anymore. But at least they get a write-up this time, where last time they were kind of lumped in with some other things. This time the elven pantheon gets a full listing, powers, domains, who are their worshipers, where are their remaining strongholds, those things. So I was happy to squeeze that into the book.
Don't go anywhere. There's more tabletop babble coming up.
Alright, so my bosses James Introcaso and Rudy Basso asked me to record a commercial for the Newbie DM minicast, my new 5 to 10 minute podcast aimed at giving dungeon masters quick nuggets of advice. But I've never cut a commercial before, so let me see what I could do. Best radio voice. Alright, Newbie DM here, inviting you... Oh wow, that's terrible. Hello, Newbie DM here, inviting you to join the minicast. Wow, that's bad. This sucks. I'm never going to get this commercial for the Newbie DM minicast done, and James and Rudy are going to be mad at me. Well, you know what? Let me just put this aside for now and get back to recording another episode of the minicast where I give out some hot DMing advice, and I'll come back to the commercial later. Sorry, James. Sorry, Rudy. It's not going to happen right now.
All right, back to the show. So the Southlands, you brought that up. That had come out after the Midgard campaign settings. Midgard campaign setting came out 6 years ago. Then the Southlands came out. Are they both in the Worldbook?
Well, okay, so yes and no, right? The Southlands book is like 250 pages by itself.
Right. Sure, it would be all of the Worldbook. So we could have
put it in the Worldbook, and it would have been about half of it, right? and we couldn't... Much as I love the Southlands and as many adventures and as much fun as I've had there, we kept it down to a chapter of its own, plus a section on the Pantheon, plus a bunch of, rules material supporting it and some Knowles material. So we had to trim it way back. But the majority of the... it's going to sound awkward. The northern Southlands, the section closest to the rest of Midgard, that part is described, and that's basically Nuria Natal is sort of the Egypt analog. There's an Arabian section, the Dominion of the Windlords, the whole desert. There's free cities. Sewal goes way back in the campaign setting. It's sort of the Zobek of the south, a free city, trade hub. We talk about the Corsair coast. There's a ton of material on the Southlands, but we don't go the full, if we want to do the whole Southlands for 5th edition, we're going to need a new book, right? And we've talked about it, updating the map, doing more with the hieroglyphic magic, new stats, new spells. It's doable, but there's enough to play with here. All the adventures that we've released so far are either up in the ruins of the Minotaur kingdoms, or they're in Nuria Natal in the city of the cat. So yeah, we've covered the big bets in the Southlands.
Definitely. And I would say, as a proud owner of the Southlands book, who again is not a big Pathfinder person, I use that book all the time. It is one of the most beautiful books I own, rivaled only by other Kobold press products, I think. And it is just rich with so much information. But it's great that for people who don't have that book, that they'll be able to get a taste of that book and of the Southlands in their full Midgard book, which is pretty great.
Right. And I mean, the character types are all there too, right? Like in the Hero's Handbook, some of the Southlands material is there. In particular, playable Gnolls and playable Minotaurs, who would be two major races of the Southlands, are in the Midgard Hero's Handbook. So if you want to play someone from the Southlands, no problem.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. There's so many. Oh man, Heroes of the Southlands is great. So I assume we're seeing lots of the races from that supplement show up in the.
Yeah, now we did that Heroes series probably as some of our first 5th edition products, and they were aimed at, hey, let's broaden the array of races available to people, and let's make the Southlands playable with 5e, because the timing on that was, we shipped it as a Pathfinder book, and then 5e came out, and we're like, we want some D&D characters to play in the Southlands. And so we did this little supplement, Midgard Heroes, then Southlands Heroes, then Unlikely Heroes. We didn't pick up all of those things in the Heroes Handbook for Midgard because some of them are just too weird and niche. Like, some people want to play a Darrow or a Lamia or a Sahuagin, right? But most people don't.
Sure.
So we stuck to things that people might want. And the other thing the Heroes Handbook does is it picks up one bet we really missed, because in Tome of Beasts, we introduced the bear folk as a monster race. And then I was like, well, they're all over the Shadow Realm, and they're great NPCs, and I love playing them as NPCs. They're in Midgard, but and they're up in the Northlands too. But I never thought of them as a player race until we published Tome of Beasts, and then everyone's like, so where are the player race stats for this? Because I want to play this. And I went, oh, duh, I'm an idiot, right? I should have had that sitting in the Midgard Heroes booklet a year ago at that point. So we put the bear folk in as a race that doesn't appear in those little booklets. And of course, they're written into the description of the Shadow Realm and the Northlands and everywhere else they appear in Midgard. And they're really something new for the new 2nd edition. The bear folk that were in the prior version of Midgard in 2012 are, let's say, they're sort of embryonic. They're seeds. They're there, but there's not much going on in the text. So they've gotten smarter and better and more interesting, largely in response to feedback from players and from customers and from people who picked up Tome of Beasts. So, settings change. You see what people love and what they don't respond to. And, having years to think about it and a successful Kickstarter to fund it meant we revisited a lot of our assumptions from the first time around.
It's very cool because Midgard feels like a living world, right? You have updated, right, the timeline in the world a little bit.
Oh, yes. The timeline update was one of those things where I said, well, I've spent years complaining about this settings changed too much. Or I don't like the change. And just being one of those, you moved my cheese people. And I don't want to be that guy. But then when the shoe was on the other foot, I'm like, we played a lot of games in the last 5 years. Oh, and by the way, we published these 24 adventures, some of which tie directly into various aspects of the setting. Maybe we should ignore all that and pretend nothing's happened. No, maybe we should advance the timeline a little. So the standard rule is, 1 year of time in the real world is about 2 years of game time for me. I try to make sure that seasons come and go, and if the players are not ready for winter, I can still show up one day at the game session and say, snow's falling, and they're like, the passes are closed, we can't do the thing, or we have to walk the shadow roads to get to where we want to go. Time passes, weather changes, kings rise and fall, queens, it was tough to make that decision. But once I said, yeah, we're going to make a few changes, and we've got about a 10-year span to do it, then I started picking at what that means, right? Like Zobek has an elected mayor, and their term is about 10 years. I forget if it's 8 or 10, but it was like, crap, we need a new mayor. Well, yeah, of course we do. This new mayor's been unofficial, but over here for ages. Hey, the Dragon Empire's always expanding. They're super warlike. I wonder who they've conquered. Oh, wait, we had an adventure about that. It's right over here. We could talk about how that played out, right? Or the Shadow Fae have opened certain new portals. Oh, yeah, we had that great big adventure over here. Well, maybe we can put that NPC into Zobek. Yeah, right? And so we started merging threads and combining elements and saying, okay, in a 10-year span, what's changed? And most things haven't, but a couple of big ones have, right? Like one big country decided to go out and conquer its neighbor. A couple of kings got killed on the battlefield. Magical changes have occurred. One god has been freed, another goddess imprisoned. So none of it is in the category of like realm-shaking events. It's all over. The spell plague is upon us. But for people who know the setting well, they're still pretty big changes. So we had to move the borders on the maps. Let's say that, right? And Prince Lucan of Morgau has crowned himself king, right? He's like, I rule. Well, yeah, I do rule, and now I'm king. And no one can tell him no, because he's a freaking vampire.
Right.
It was a blast to advance the timeline and take both stuff from the home game and stuff from adventures and stuff that just sort of made sense and use it to ramp up the conflict. The other thing we did in a couple places, we had set up all this dynamite and all these casks of gunpowder in the first version. And in a few cases, we said, well, that's not just going to sit there with a fuse running for 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's blown up.
Sure.
Right. And did it blow up this way or that way? Well, let's talk about what the design implications are this way or that way. And in a couple cases, we hedged, right? Like, well, we didn't want it to go this way. We didn't want it to go that way. Okay, this is an ongoing conflict. It's still happening. It's still a sore spot. And it's still a place where there's adventure. Mm-hmm. Great. But we had to revisit literally every country and like take stuff from the Southlands book, rich extra detail, and pour it into the chapter while not increasing the word count more than like 30%.
An impossible task. Sounds like spinning straw into gold. That's crazy.
Everybody complained at me when we did the first book. It's like, you're not giving me enough room to talk about what I want to talk about. I'm like, you're the designer. Tighten it up, make it happen, fit it in those many words. Or I'd say the same thing to myself. It's like, well, I told everyone else they get 10,000 words for this kind of piece. I guess I better walk the walk. And now I got to fit Sobek into 10,000 words, right? So yeah, even though the book is like 50% longer and jam-packed with a ton of extra setting material, we still feel like, wow, we could have done even more. And maybe we'll do setting books down the road, like for the Shadow Realm, right?
Sure.
Where you could do a whole thing on just that instead of a chapter. Or the Southlands, where it's like, well, everybody likes having a chapter. That's a start. But could you take that Pathfinder book and update it for 5e and expand it and maybe do a Pathfinder appendix that it adds some of that new stuff?
That's true.
Well, yeah, we could. If we had infinite hours. So the question becomes when.
Sure,
right?
Sure. Well, and there's so much good stuff out there already. And it is, it's pretty easy to convert 1-to-1. And don't make this man work on more Pathfinder stuff when Pathfinder 2 is about to come out.
Well, that's the other thing, right? It's like our interest in Pathfinder was really strong right until Pathfinder 2 came out. And then it's like, yeah, we're going to wait. Because we have people on the team who are, more 5e skewed and people who are more Pathfinder skewed. But everybody knows that once you declare a new edition, it's like,
sure.
I don't want to say kiss of death for sales, but everyone's holding their breath.
Right.
It's like, was the new edition good? And how much work would it be to fix it and change it? So it's like, we're a 5e company basically until we figure out what's going on with Pathfinder 2.0. And that might take us a year.
That's true. Right. And there are many, many fine Pathfinder products already available on the Kobold Press store.
The other thing, right? Midgard started as a Pathfinder. Well, no, it started as a D&D 3.5 setting. Mm-hmm. And then it was a 4th edition setting. Then was a Pathfinder setting, and now it's a 5th edition setting. So part of me is like, it's not really a setting that's all about the mechanics. It's like, we can make the mechanics work because it's a core dark fantasy. It works with D&D.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's not Dark Sun or something that has so many, or Spelljammer, like that requires a whole set of mechanics just to support the premise.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
But,
It's true. And it makes it easy for GMs to do stuff on the fly if they want to take it into Savage Worlds or 13th
oh,
Age or that
yeah.
sort of thing, you know? So
Absolutely. And we get reports once in a while. Somebody who's like, I'm running it with Fate. I'm like, yay, go you, have fun. I'm like, that's not my game, but I hear it's good. So yeah, it does get picked up. The Worldbook in particular is meant to be easy to bring to the rule set you want, but especially 5th edition or especially Pathfinder, it has the most support. And the Hero's Handbook is meant to be, you're playing 5e, guess what? We've got you totally covered.
very much so. And it's what's really cool and interesting too is that a lot of our listeners have the Tome of Beasts, and Tome of Beasts has some very great Midgard lore in it that you can use both together. You know what I mean? There's a lot of those little sidebars about how monsters, what they're like in Midgard and where you can find them and stuff is great to use hand in hand. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Tome of Beasts is meant to be, hey, no matter what you're playing, this is going to be useful to you. But for a bunch of them, it was just hard not to say, okay, here's the sidebar about where these things are from and how they fit into Midgard, because that's where they came from, right? And I don't know if there's a particularly Midgardy type of monster. I think there probably is. But everything from the dust goblins to, the bear folk, to the Nightgarm, all those Norse monsters in there, and a bunch of the desert monsters all find an easy home in Midgard. Some of them are called out and referenced in the Worldbook. We'll say, oh, go see Tome of Beasts for this thing. But we don't lean on it super heavily, right? We like the ghouls get called out on that way because there's a whole kingdom of them. And if you need their stats, hey, here they are. But for most of them, it's like, well, a Minotaur is a Minotaur. A gibbering mouther in the Western Wastes is going to be a gibbering mouther.
Sure. Not much difference going on over there.
Right. You're still unhappy to see it,
right.
but there it is, right?
Still a pile of mouths and eyes.
Yeah.
And there you have it.
Right. It's like, think of the XP. Think of the nightmares. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I imagine a gelatinous cube doesn't change much from setting to setting, right?
No, not really, right? So we keep it easy there. Other stuff, man, I don't want to do spoilers on the Shadow Realm, but that chapter was one that I really, really wanted to see happen. And Dan Dillon wrote it, and it came together beautifully, and it pulls threads from like 3 prior adventures or sources and spins them into a single unified piece, so that now when players walk off the Shadow Roads, the game master can say, well, you're here. Well, where's here? Well, it's called the Shadow Realm. What's that? You guys have no idea, right?
It's true. Wow.
And they can wander around, have whole. It's a mirror universe. It's the Upside Down. It's that other place that isn't nice and friendly.
And with Dan Dillon, a great designer and just a brilliant sort of storyteller on that chapter. Oh, so good. He actually is a member of the Shadow Court.
Yes. Oh, he totally is. He's a baron, a count. I'm not sure.
It's true. So yeah, that's amazing. And there's so many good things. If you own Tome of Beasts, you can sort of tie directly in to Midgard, which is great. And as we're getting towards the close here, Wolfgang, I just want to talk about your experiences, because this is your world, right? This is where you run games.
I do, and yet I feel less possessive of it now than I did before, partly because I've got a bunch of co-authors, right? And I don't want to pretend that I wrote the whole 450-page book, because I didn't.
Right.
It's like I wrote 3 chapters and parts of other chapters, but Richard Green wrote 3 chapters too, and Dan Dillon wrote 1, and Chris Harris stepped in for 1, and John Sawatsky did a great job with the Ruthenian. I mean, so yes, co-authors everywhere. But it is still my baby, ultimately. And I read through it, and everything in the book, is to some degree the way I want it. And sometimes the way I want it is, hey, Dan, why don't you write the Shadow Realm? I know you'll do something cool with it.
Mm-hmm.
and here are some notes, right? But my experience has been the same experience I had the first time I published this, which is the more you play it and the more like people ask questions about it and the more the characters want X, Y, or Z explained to them, the richer your setting gets because you're making up answers to fill whatever holes there are. And when players really thrill to something like, they don't like the red goddess, but gosh, she sure is an interesting villain, and her followers, then you say, well, that was a really minor shrine way back when, right? A shrine on the Great Northern Road through the Margrave Forest. It was dark and dank, and there was a pile of bones on the altar and a little straw doll. And I was like, oh, this is a creepy place. Yes, it is. And before you know it, it's like, well, she's got an entry here, and a domain, and she's got a cult of followers. I'm like, oh, okay, that's grown sort of naturally. She's got a cult of followers. And they're kind of freaky and awful, but okay, good villains. And, you've defeated them. Huzzah, yay you, heroes. It was creepy once. Now it's been driven out of town. This cult is no more. Who knew that a councilman was, quite so depraved as to be a member? Now solved. Well, yeah, that was great. What if I bring them back? You're visiting the vampire's castle. You're invited guests. You're trying to negotiate this passage of this trade caravan. And, as you're leaving the mansion, there's a little altar in the shrine room off the foyer and a little straw doll. And what is that vampire doing with them? Oh, yeah. No, you guys are leaving now. Bye. And, the more you play it, the more interesting it gets, the richer it gets, the more time you spend on the setting making connections between different parts of it, the cooler it gets. Mm-hmm. And what I can say is I've been playing this setting in various forms, like the Archmages of Bemia and Elaine and the Magocracies. I've been in my campaign since I was literally 12 years old, right? So that stuff I've got down cold, but some of it is new from the last 5 or 6 years. I'm trying to connect it to the old stuff. I'm trying to make sure that all the gods, all the heroes, all the conflicts are still interesting. And when I get bored with a conflict, it doesn't disappear. I just stop developing that part and I move to something else. So world building for me and Midgard for me is like a big black pearl, right? It's got layers. It's been sitting at the bottom of the sea. It gets a new layer every year. Every game session, we're adding a layer onto that dark pearl. And the longer you give it, the richer and more lustrous it is. So campaign settings grow like tiny bit by tiny bit, session by session, day by day, note by note. And I'm a little bit terrified of where we're going to be 6 years from now, right? And saying, well, the third edition of Midgard is 600 pages and it comes with 12 supplements. I'm like, no, we're going to have to find a way to deal with that. But it just keeps getting better, right? The adventures get more interesting. The character options are richer. And sort of the history of what's gone before gets cooler. We're competing with people who have been running rich campaign worlds for 40 years, right? Like Ravenloft is almost that old. The Forgotten Realms is in that category. A new fantasy setting has to be sharp and awesome and beautiful and full of, thrilling adventure to catch anyone's attention these days, because 40 years of Realms history has made that a really interesting place with lots of nooks and crannies. It's easier to wrap your brain around Midgard still, even after 5 or 6 years. But for me, it's just a cool thing that keeps growing better.
That's amazing. That is just such a wonderful thing for you to see. And you've brought joy to my life and so many other people's life. So thank you for bringing Midgard into the real world.
Hooray! I know what you mean. Actual terror on actual players' faces. That's what we want.
That's right. Thank you for killing many of my players. So let me ask you, where can people find you and what can they do if they want to buy these Midgard books?
Sure. The Midgard books are available down at your friendly local game store. They're down on your friendly local Kobold Press website. Koboldpress.com has a store, and we ship everywhere. They're available through a drive-through and RPG Now as PDFs. They're available on the Paizo web store. Some people don't know it, but the Paizo web store carries freaking everything. You can buy your 5th edition books. You can buy your Fate books. You can buy your Fantasy Flight board games. I mean, it's just a giant online store. And am I forgetting someplace? It's not on Amazon yet, but it might be later this year. That's always kind of a whenever they feel like it kind of deal. It'll be down at your local Barnes and Noble in a week or 2 or 3. And it's pretty broadly distributed. The nice thing about being a company that's been around for a while is we have good distribution, great distribution in the US and Canada, and pretty decent in Europe. So you can find it. Of course, speaking for me personally, hey, pick it up at the Kobold store.
That is true. Yes. Buying stuff directly from a seller cuts out the middleman, gives them a couple more of your dollars. Yeah. So if you're able to buy from the Kobold store, I would recommend that highly to help get more Midgard products.
Yes. We're working on the next wave, man.
Exactly. So, Wolfgang, thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a good time here.
Man, that is awesome. I love whenever Wolfgang Baur comes around. He is the most brilliant person. What a cool dude. Wolfgang, thank you so much for sharing your brain and a look into the Midgard campaign setting. Really, really awesome stuff. You know, Tabletop Babble is only in its 2nd year of podcast existence, and we could use your help growing the show. So head on over to iTunes. If you don't have an account, create a free account and give us a 5-star rating. When you do, I will read your review out loud and credit you. You can make me say anything you want, like the Tales from the Fandom podcast, with a review entitled "A Great Show with Wide Variety." I love getting to listen to Tabletop Babble, from the variety of content that they cover to the multiple different guests. It is one of the most enjoyable tabletop role-playing podcasts out there. David with Tales from the Fandom and Tales from the Five Nation podcast. David, thank you so much for leaving this review. Everybody, if you want to check out a very good podcast, head on over, Tales from the Fandom. There's some great listening over there, and also a very good Twitter account, Tales from the Fandom. So check them out. Thank you so much for leaving this review. I really, really appreciate it. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso. That's JamesIntrocaso. And you can follow everything I'm doing game design over at worldbuilderblog.me. I also want to tell you about another show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. I'm talking about the Behold Her podcast. It's new. Its first episode has launched. It is a monthly podcast from Lisa Chen, who is a designer, mover and shaker, Adventures League adminer, and all-around awesome person, now podcaster on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Lisa is talking with non-dudes in gaming about their experiences gaming and what it's been like, and the awesome things that they are creating, showing just how diverse the world of gaming really, really is. We could not be happier to have Behold Her podcast on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. It is really, really good. Like, good to the point where I was like, oh, I gotta up my Tabletop Babble game when I listened to the first episode. So go check it out. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. A random table could make things more interesting.
Gather round, travelers, to hear our tale.
A mysterious organization called the Sisters of Sorrow have swept up our three heroes, and it is up to Kara, Saye, and Arnadel to do battle with the forces of evil and financial destitution.
We shall battle with ancient lore.
Take them down with our sharp reflexes?
Hey, did you guys finish the last of the ale?
Venture Maidens is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition actual play podcast featuring a cast of 4 lifelong gamers.
Kara, not now. We're recording a podcast ad.
Right. I chop it with my axe.
For gold and glory.
We post our episodes every other Sunday. We've got monsters, treasure, role-playing, a cool plot, and some strange NPCs. Find the Venture Maidens podcast today on iTunes or wherever podcasts are free. Until then, venture away.